Hi, and welcome to the Class Vendor Excellence Series. I'm Rebecca Hammond, and joining me is Robbie Bullough, our Senior Insights Director here at Class. We are so excited today because we have a new model that we'd like to introduce to you that will really help us understand the sales momentum that different vendors are experiencing in a variety of segments. Historically at Class, we have looked to understand the customer experience that vendors are providing their customers by researching and understanding the successes and failures that these vendors are providing to their customers. A few years ago, we also started collecting data around wins and losses that these vendors were experiencing as they were being considered and also winning business with future customers. So we wanted to see how we could essentially combine that data into a model to understand the sales momentum and energy that these different vendors have in their particular markets.
And this is exciting because the historical data we've been able to show kind of in the past what's happened, make recommendations on what to do to improve, and then be able to measure it again, but it's always looking back in the past at what customers and clients' experiences have been like. So to be able to now look forward and look in the future and see, are there good predictors here of future market energy and growth? For example, if you look at this hypothetical example of two vendors, both of them with the exact same class overall score, which is incorporating a variety of questions. But if we look at where those questions are, which ones are ranked high or low for that particular vendor, you see that not all things are created equal. Even though their score is an 82, when we look at this, we would expect, based on this model, for one of them to have higher sales than the other one. Specifically, if we look at vendor B, delivery of new technology, executive involvement, supports integration goals, those are specific metrics that we've been talking about for a long time. We see that really regardless of the market segment, integration is what drives decisions. Provider organizations are looking for integration, and in cases they're even willing to forego some functionality just for the sake of getting some integration. So that seems to be like table stakes. We also preach all the time about how important relationships are in healthcare. Our success equation talks about great relationships and good technology being key to customer success, and executive involvement really gets at that relationship. And delivery of new technology, even with technology in the name, there's a lot of relationship metrics there because this involves communicating the roadmap to customers and a lot of things that really tie into that executive involvement. So seeing the integration and the relationship metrics as the highest rated ones for vendor B, you would expect with this model that would be a higher predictor of sales, even with an identical class score between vendors A and B.
Right, so with this model, we didn't want to just use the overall class score to understand future sales and retention. We knew that really getting a closer look at the ranking of these particular metrics was going to be critical to predicting the future.
And there's kind of four key metrics that we'll look at. You can see all of those metrics there on the right side. Likely to recommend up there at the top is definitely one of those four that we look at, as well as the other three that we saw in that example. The executive involvement, the delivery of new technology, and the supports integration goals. Rebecca, let's talk about each of these four in particular. Executive involvement, I know, is one that sometimes can be a little bit more difficult to understand. Can you kind of break this apart for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, when we ask providers about the executive involvement that they're receiving, it really doesn't come down to specific contact with a particular executive, but really, how is that vendor duplicating what a customer might have received had they had contact with the executive? So are they able to have access to someone that is knowledgeable about the inner workings of that company and also the customer's particular needs? Is that individual empowered to really break down barriers and help that customer solve problems? And so really they're looking for the qualities that you would receive in an executive to be duplicated in the rest of their team. So that's something that's really critical when it comes to executive involvement. That could be an account manager, that could be a sales rep, that could be a customer success manager, and that's really what we're looking at when we talk about executive involvement.
I love the focus you put on empowerment, because I love when I'm on the phone with a provider and I ask them this question and they say, well, I've never talked to the vendor executives, but I don't need to because my account manager takes care of me.
Exactly.
That is high executive involvement, and that's exactly what these provider organizations are looking for. Delivery of new technology, this is a fun one to talk about too, because there's really two aspects of it. When provider organizations are answering this question about their vendors and the solutions they're using, they have both a historical view and kind of a forward-looking view. Historically, they're looking and saying, okay, in the past, have there been upgrades that have been delivered? What's been the cadence of those? Have they broken anything, or have they run pretty seamlessly? And as those upgrades have been delivered, have they been what meets my needs? Has the vendor historically delivered what meets my needs? And then they look to the future and say, do I understand the roadmap? Can I articulate my vendor's roadmap? Do I know what things are coming? Do I feel like I've had a say and some input in what that roadmap looks like? And are these things that are going to solve the problems that I have right now? And that's the piece that is very relationship focused, because a vendor might be, giving those upgrades and providing those solutions, but if the provider organization doesn't know it because that roadmap hasn't been communicated, then that's going to affect the delivery of new technology score. So the relationship is still very important here in delivery of new technology. Supports integration goals. We talked about this one a little bit, where this is the table stakes. What they're looking for is integration. And Rebecca and I have both been on the phone with providers who have talked about, the functionality isn't, there's others that have more functionality in the market, but this integrates with my EMR and with the other software that we're using in our hospital. And so we go with it. And we trust that our enterprise vendor is going to get there with the functionality. They're willing to put that kind of a price on integration because it's so important to them. And then likely to recommend is the last one, which of these four might even be the most important.
Yeah, so likely to recommend is essentially KLAS's equivalent of an NPS score. And this really helps us understand all of the upstream experiences that the customer's having with this vendor that ultimately leads to whether or not they would recommend this vendor to a peer if asked, as that peer is making a buying decision themselves. So as we think about these four metrics and we look back at really this ranking approach that we're taking with this model, all of a sudden the actual score, the actual average that each metric receives no longer matters. And really what matters is the rank in which they were placed. And so these four metrics are going to be the strongest predictors of future sales and retention. So we want to share an example with you in the EMR segment. So this is a segment that many people are familiar with, the acute care EMR segment. And we're looking at two vendors here that have a very different set of ranks. So we really can ignore the actual overall scores for each of these questions so that you can see for this first vendor, likely to recommend is in that 15 spot. So this is the strongest performing metric that this vendor has in comparison to all other metrics that we're looking at. For the second vendor, you can see that this is falling much lower. So it is at the 4th spot for this particular vendor. And as we look historically at just likely to recommend and where that rank has fallen, you can see that for the first vendor, likely to recommend has consistently been their top performing metric year over year over year. And you can see the amount of sales energy that they have received as a result of that experience that they're providing their customers. So they are by far outperforming vendor 2 when it comes to hospitals sold and hospitals lost. Now you look at vendor 2 and you can see there's a fairly strong rank that they have a few years ago, but over the years that rank for likely to recommend starts to fall, and you can see that as a result, their sales also continue to fall and their lost customers increases. And so this is a great example as we're looking at the importance of the ranking of these questions, not just simply looking at overall score, not just simply looking at the average of that particular metric, that really helps us understand where the sales momentum is coming from.
And it makes sense that it's likely to recommend because that's kind of a composite score anyway, right? It's not looking at a single thing, but really, when we're on the phone with providers, they're taking all of these other questions into account when they're determining what they're going to say for likely to recommend. And for me personally, I like that as a composite score even more than just the overall satisfaction question that we ask, because I can determine my own overall satisfaction, but that stays with me. But whether or not I'm likely to recommend something to somebody else and put myself out there for that, I think that requires even a higher level of satisfaction to not only say, yeah, I'm okay with it, but I'm okay with it to the point that I'm willing to go out and put my name out there and recommend this to somebody else. And so it's a good composite ranking that's going to take in all of these other things.
Absolutely, Robbie. So if you're interested in the actual statistics behind this model, we have a video that goes into depth on the math, and you'd be able to see us walk through some of the equations and the specifics of the model. So be on the lookout for that if that's something you're interested in digging into. Additionally, following this video, we will be releasing a series that will take you in depth into a variety of market segments so you can see class's predictions for the sales momentum in each of these different segments moving forward. Thank you for joining us in the Class Vendor Excellence series. If you'd like to learn more, you can reach us at info@classresearch.com or go to the class website at classresearch.com.